Yakuza 7 Like a Dragon is a disappointment. Now, if you've been following my channel for any length of time, you will know that I am a massive fan of the Yakuza series. I think it's one of the most innovative, fun, and refreshing series around, and I have loved every minute that I put in to every Yakuza game. And yet, I have some deep-seated problems with how they manage the transition in this game from the old-school brawler battle system to their version of a JRPG battle system. And I just felt like, as I was reading the reviews, the problems with that transition were significantly underplayed in a lot of what I've read and a lot of what I've seen. So I want to go into that in depth in this video. And my overarching point is the concept of moving to this kind of battle system is not necessarily the wrong concept, but the system they designed is the wrong system for the series. And I'm not necessarily arguing that we go back to the brawler system or the type of brawler system that we had in the past. I will admit, as much as I enjoyed that and I personally like that, to me, I was playing Streets of Rage in 3D, and that is something that I wanted since I was a kid. I get that something new had to happen, but exactly what happened wasn't the choice I would have made. So, right off the bat, I mean, I am going to praise a couple elements of this game. I think, first and foremost, while I have my problems with the battle system, the actual feel of the turn-based battles is excellent. They really did manage to simulate the fast, dynamic fighting that you had in the previous games within the confines of the turn-based battle system. Everything is quick, it's snappy, you know, it's easy to get items, to get your summons, you know, obviously to do all the different types of special attacks. And I will say that the turn-based battle approach does raise the stakes of certain battles. Even on lesser battles, it makes them a little bit more involved. Now, I'm not going to say that there's some, you know, deep strategy to kind of beating up thugs on the street, because there really isn't. At the end of the day, in the old Yakuza games, you were, you know, pressing the square button a million times. And in this one, fundamentally, it comes down to pressing the X button to vanquish the lesser foes. But as you kind of move through the game, and you move sort of street by street in the city, the enemy variety, their strengths and weaknesses are such that, you know, you do have to do a little bit more thinking, and it just gives you a depth to the fight, even if ultimately the calculations aren't that difficult. And I think another thing it does pretty successfully is because you're not focused in on the action, on precise button presses. You can actually take in the scenery some more. You can take in the character design some more. It is, I would say, a visually more immersive way to handle fighting. The other success that this game has, which I think was one of the hardest things to pull off, is, you know, moving away from Kiryu and coming up with a likable, believable character that fits the melodramatic, zany world of Yakuza. And I think Ichiban does that. I think they really hit the ball out of the park with the main character, with his interactions with all the different side characters that come up. It was just a perfect and smooth transition, and as you play this, you know, it is absolutely perfectly Yakuza. And it's interesting, this idea that you have a whole bunch of, you know, middle-aged guys, at least the initial characters, and their lives haven't worked out for various reasons, and they're sort of banding together to uncover this intricate plot. You know, it's different. I mean, I get that Kiryu in a lot of those games was, in fact, a middle-aged guy whose life plan didn't quite work out, but he was, you know, the stoic hero, you know, the guy destined for greatness, the feared, you know, former head of the Tojo clan, and here you just have basically a bunch of sort of meaningless rabble on the sides of the Yakuza world, who nonetheless, do something very interesting in this game. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything. But, so those are, I think are two major successes. And you have to give that to the studio. You have to give that to the developers. Neither of those two things could fail. If the combat felt bad, or if the story was just mediocre, I think you would have resentment on a part of at least the longtime fans. So now the negatives here, and there really are some major negatives. First, and I'm going to talk about the PlayStation Pro, the graphics in this game are a real downgrade over what we experienced before. I said about Yakuza 6 and Judgment that I didn't think it was good to move to 30 FPS. As far as 30 FPS games go, I mean, it's not terrible. It's not clunky necessarily, but that 30 FPS kind of introduces a smear, an imprecision. It's not like playing 60 FPS Yakuza. I think that was really something that was a mistake for this series. But even the textures, I don't know if the game world is bigger. I think this version of Yokohama is bigger, or at least it's a bigger map, or feels like a bigger map than Tokyo, than Kamurocho. But if you look up, if you look up close at some textures, I mean, some of them honestly look like PS2 era textures. And now, of course, Kamurocho's in this game, so I don't know if some kind of compression was introduced, but visually, while it still has that nice attention to detail in the world, the actual assets aren't as detailed, aren't as high resolution, but that's kind of a minor point. The larger point lies not necessarily in the mechanics of the battle system, but the pacing of the game and how the battle system is set up. Now, if you read the reviews, many will talk about how this game is easy. And that is true. For large swaths of the game, it is actually a very easy game. And I think erring on the side of being easy is the right move. But what I didn't read in the reviews, or at least many of the reviews, are these enormous difficulty spikes that happen throughout the game. And the structure of the rewards that you get for the grinding that you will have to do to overcome these spikes. And these are the things that kind of really limited my enjoyment of the game. So, first and foremost, you start off this game with basically nothing. You're in a homeless camp, and you have to kind of fight your way out of this existence. And at the very onset of the game, it is impossible to come by money. I mean, you are fighting battles, that start off, while not difficult in the sense that you're going to lose them, they are harder. It feels like there's something at stake, and the rewards that you get as far as experience and money are very, very small. I mean, for the first, 20% of the game, 25% of the game, you're getting maybe 500 to 200, 50 to 200 yen per battle, and then sometimes, as you move on, you'll get 500, but to get 1,000 yen for a battle, you're almost at the midpoint of the game, and it doesn't seem like the experience is such that you can level up easily. So early on, I found myself just hoarding healing items, and there was no sense of, well, I'm just going to fight a little bit, get some money, and go to the arcade, because you really do have to manage your inventory. So I thought, okay, well, it's kind of an interesting way to portray the experience of being homeless. There's you're really grasping at straws as far as rewards, but that structure never really let up. And while eventually you do get some money, there are ways to earn money through different side quests, kind of different battles that you can fight, different contracts and quests that you can take. When you hit those difficulty spikes in the game, and I would say they happen at the midway point and towards the end, you're still going to be in that loop of, okay, well, now I'm making some money, but I'm still having, to grind for levels. And yet it doesn't feel like you're ever sufficiently able to do this. There's a lot of time wasting that goes on because of this system. So as you progress in the game and you're fighting some of these tougher battles, the bosses and enemies, to me, feel cheap. They're kind of like hit sponges, or they use a lot of buffs, and so the fight takes forever. And as a result, you need a lot of healing items. You need a lot of things to reverse status ailments. And because of that, you're always searching and going after these various medicines. And so whereas in previous Yakuza games, yeah, you were injured, you had your, magical energy drinks, but you were still relying on your skill at playing that brawler fighting system to win those battles. Here, you're constantly worrying about all the different status ailments and trying to reverse them. Now, there are ways that you can kind of work your characters and have different jobs and skills that kind of negate that to a certain extent. But it just feels like, at the very least, these added things you have to worry about in battle extends the fights where they don't really need to be extended. So it wastes your time on that level. But also on the level of design, the fact that you will run into some moments where you're under-leveled and you get beat by a boss, or if you, early in the game, go into a part of the city where you shouldn't be, I mean, you will get beaten. Whereas in previous Yakuza games, even in a hard fight, I could always figure out a way to win. But if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time and you're under-leveled, you will lose. There are also dungeon runs that you can do throughout the game, but there are very few save points. So you start going through one of these labyrinths, and you make it halfway through, and then it turns out, you know what, you really needed to be at a higher level, and you get killed. All of the experience is lost. Now, I don't have a problem with games being difficult and kind of forcing you to rethink your strategy, but when progress is lost, that to me is the cardinal sin of game design, because it erases your investment of time. It forces you to retrace your steps. And at this point in my life, and it could be an age thing, if I were 22 years old and I had all the time in the world, maybe this wouldn't be an issue. But where I only have a couple hours where I can dedicate to playing this game, I can't retrace my steps. I can't do the same things over again because of a design issue. If I were able to go through those dungeons and, hey, I make my run and I get 75% of the way through and I lose because of some fault of my own, or maybe I'm still under-leveled, but I get the experience that I had in doing that, and then maybe I can try it again with better equipment or different jobs, I would have no problems with that. But to just lose progress in a game, to me, is unacceptable. And the sense that, you always have to manage your inventory efficiently and manage your jobs efficiently meant that I was always focused on the healing items, on the weapons, on the upgrades, on some of the crafting, and I wasn't devoting as much time to the mini-games and to the side quests, because you get into this mentality of, hey, do you really want to waste 25,000 yen on buying into the Mahjong League when I know that I can use that to get, all these different things that I need to win some of these battles later in the game? And it's particularly problematic, I would say, up to the 60-70% of the way through the game, because, as you're walking around the city, if you die, you lose half of your money. So I learned that the hard way when I was just trying to explore the map just to see the game, and I went into a part of the city I shouldn't be, and I lost all of that money that I had fought very hard to accumulate. So you really want to deposit your money in ATM machines and kind of guard it, and so you're never in that situation until, I'm sure much, much later in the game, where you can just, hey, I got 1,000,000 yen in my pocket, and I'm going to go out and have fun with all the different things the game has to offer. Now, as far as the jobs go, I mean, it's interesting, but again, it's another thing that you have to manage. And one of the things that I found somewhat disappointing is that I noticed that the game offers DLC, and a lot of the DLC options were job packs or job points. You had some item packs that kind of help you craft weapons, and I don't really recall Yakuza being this heavy into DLC. And in fact, it seemed like when you put in a new Yakuza game, you would actually get a lot of that stuff, some weapons, some cool items that could help you in your quest early on. So I think it's very telling that there is no easy mode in this game, at least not that I could find. There's a normal mode, and then if you beat it, you unlock the Game Plus modes and stuff like that are super difficult. Now again, the normal mode is not hard by JRPG standards, but it frustrates. It forces you to buy in to a lot of these systems that it would be nice to not necessarily pay so much attention to. And it seems like what they're doing is selling you the easy mode that wasn't included in the game. And I think the game needs, if you want to call it an easy mode, or it needs a mode that doesn't make you beholden to the tedium of the status effects, of precise inventory management, of bosses who, just absorb hits for the purposes of extending a fight and having you, wear down your in-game resources. In the old games, if you played it on easy, it seemed like the stock difficulty was adjusted, particularly in the boss fights. And, it was almost as if the devs knew, hey, our old brawler battle system was stale, it was unrefined, so if you put the game on easy, you never really had to pay for the shortcomings of the system. You could kind of gloss over its various quirks and inadequacies, and you could just move through the game. You still had some close fights. You still had bosses where you may have needed a couple weapons or needed to stack up on healing items, but more or less you were going to get through that fight. And that's what this game really doesn't have. I found that if I wasn't prepared, if I didn't strategize how I was going to go into some of these more difficult fights, I would lose, because it was cheap, and it put all of these obstacles in my way. If you're getting poisoned and you don't have enough of the antidotes, and you don't have your job set up in such a way that you can deal with those status effects, it's a major problem. And I think that's where it's supposedly, by JRPG standards, it's trying to be like a Dragon Quest. It's trying to be like Pokemon. It draws its inspirations from those games, but the grinding system isn't what you had in those games. In those games, grinding was productive. I always found, what I call grind points. Parts of the game where I could say, all right, let me level up. I don't necessarily have to, but I know that if I get that one piece of armor, if I get that weapon, I'm going to move through the next part of the game a little bit more easily. I'm going to power up my character on a schedule that I could control. And so in those games, you could kind of control the pace or difficulty of your journey a little bit more. Here, in this battle system, I would argue that throughout most of the game, the rewards for grinding are so meager that it's kind of forcing you to progress through the story at a level that you may not be comfortable with. And in certain cases, you can't even find, the locations to get items and grind for those items. Those locations are hidden until the game forces you to kind of go through the story. So it's really a predetermined pace that you're working at. And it's not fun. And I think this is where, the system kind of falls down, because it doesn't give you that freedom to, work the numbers as you could in a traditional JRPG. Now, some people may say, well, those were exploits in the past. Yeah, I get that, but at least it was a way to, maybe make the game a little bit more manageable. Again, it's not going to do anything if you don't like turn-based RPGs, but at least it's a way to avoid frustration. And So, at the end of the day, I personally got to a point where I couldn't finish the game. There are some stretches that just require a ton of grinding as you move through. And because it's not rewarding grinding, because it's not the kind of grinding that you can say, all right, I'm just going to block out an hour of my time, I'm going to grind, and I'm going to achieve X amount of levels or X amount of money, it just feels like really a chore. It's going to take way more time to grind than I can give it. And, I don't think that investment of time and that frustration it causes is worth any more time than I gave this game. So I found that, once I got into that sort of question of what value is my time, it went beyond my entertainment hours and got to the point where I said to myself, I could just be doing other things with my life. And that's a bad place for a game to be. I think games nowadays are at a point where they can be more accessible. And they can, in this case, kind of throw out an idea and say, hey, we believe that this turn-based battle system is the way we want to continue making the series. This is the way forward for Yakuza. And like I said, the mechanics are there. So the choice is between, how do we get the player into this system? And I think the way they did it was not effective. So the game isn't bad. The game is enjoyable. If you like RPGs, you're going to like it. I think if you don't, and I like JRPGs, but I was really hesitant about this game. And my dislike of a lot of what it does only came, I would say, 20 hours into the game. And then as I progressed sort of beyond that, I said, okay, now I see the problem. But it's not going to turn you off, I don't think, at the outset if you're a Yakuza fan. I mean, unless you really, really hate JRPGs. And, I think the game has to take credit. If you have to give it credit for succeeding in these two huge places where it could fail, the story and how the battles feel. But I think they need a change. I think going forward, if they stick to this, they really have to redesign the battle system in all the ways I just mentioned to account for and remove a lot of the frustration that the current system inflicts upon players. Or they just have to go back to a normal battle system. A couple people mentioned some comments that I was reading. Why not make it like Final Fantasy VII, the remake, where you can just switch between characters and you have an RPG system in place, but you actually can move around and control your character and be invested in the fight a little bit more. I think that would work. I think as it stands now, if the system remains unchanged, and this is the approach moving forward, for me, Yakuza will go from a day one purchase, and it really was the last game that I would ever purchase day one. I don't really buy new games anymore, but Yakuza was always, hey, when is it coming out? Pre-order, must get it. Those days are done. Now this is kind of a game like, I really liked it in the past, and I will be more than happy to check it out when it's on a deep discount. And I think as a longtime fan, that's not a mindset that I want to have for this series. So I'd be curious to know, especially if you're a longtime player, am I an outlier? What did you think about the battle system? Let's get the discussion going.